Hello, political science. This is Mr. Stark. I'm going to be taking you through Chapter 11, Politics Across Borders. We're going to split this PowerPoint up into two different chunks. For this one, we're going to cover pretty much the overview of the ways in which countries do business with other countries through international organizations, through international law, diplomacy. And then next class, we'll discuss in more detail the different international organizations that are out there, both private and governmental, that are responsible for countries doing operations, business, and diplomacy with each other. So Chapter 11, follow along in your Chapter 11 outlines if you have a printer. If not, I suggest you use your own piece of paper as we go through. So as you know, we talked about pretty much the whole year, including anthropology. We live in a world that is globalized, where events are not just isolated into one country or one region. We are multinational. So the U.S. and Mexico cooperate on anti-drug operations, illegal arm operations. Also, different countries work together on environmental concerns as well. All of these are part of foreign relations or international relations, as it's also sometimes called. These are the sort of two similar hats. You have foreign policy, which are the decisions and actions relative to such external actors, is a fancy name for people outside the country. And then international relations is politically relevant interactions among two or more states and external actors. So pretty similar definitions there. These are all of the places where we have missions abroad. So places where the United States is officially represented, either embassies or consuls or even missions abroad, which are even smaller. So as you can see, all over the world, the United States is represented. As we talked about last class with nations and states, three goals are prosperity, security, and stability. All three of those are influenced by their neighbors. Security being the fundamental one, obviously is influenced by your neighbors, because if your neighbor chooses to attack you, your security is, in a sense, out of your hands. Now your security is up for grabs. Anarchic is a term that many of you have heard. Anarchy means that a state's security is always at risk because there is no authority that can basically protect the country against threats to their security. This is what's called the Failed States Index. I think we saw a similar map over Chapter 5. This shows you the countries who are threatened by their very security. Central Africa being represented in the dark critical zone, some South Asian countries such as Pakistan and Afghanistan, Iraq being up there, Somalia, despite what we talked about, all that was spent trying to make Somalia better, it's still in danger or even critical. And obviously North Korea, as you can see over here in Eastern Asia, is also critical, and the issues that face those countries have a way of spilling into the neighboring countries. So ultimately, there are three perspectives on why states, in this case countries we're talking about, interact with each other. We're going to discuss two. That is the realist and liberal. Realism is sort of, you can almost say, pessimism. It says that countries, just like people, are naturally disposed to do dealings based on their own self-interest. So foreign relations, dealing with other countries, in a sense, is all about self-interest. You're dealing with countries because it benefits you or your people primarily. Everything else is secondary. The view of liberalism, which is distinct from what you think of liberal view of politics, or progressivism, different liberalism here, says that each state does make some decisions based on their own self-interest, but also they have some altruistic or more international principles. They see themselves as part of an international system, and they want to build, a more peaceful, more cooperative international system. So it's kind of a mix of self-interest, but also a desire to see a more efficient, more peaceful international community as well. So the ultimate motivations that fall under these, you could have altruism, which you deal with other countries for the interest of doing the right thing or helping them, humanitarian missions, peacekeeping, something we've talked about in Chapter 5. How peacekeeping missions, UN has taken more of an impetus on that ever since Rwanda in 1994. Accommodation. This is, you do it in order to avoid a less desirable result. So rather than allow Iran to continue kind of thumbing their nose at the international community and develop nuclear weapons, the nuclear deal was made. The nuclear deal was made in order to avoid a possible conflict between Iran and its neighbors, such as Israel. And then there's neutrality. Basically, you avoid involvement between states. So this is, in a sense, almost an absence of cooperation or of getting involved in different states' affairs. So you'll do your challenge questions all together after we finish this chapter. So don't worry about doing just challenge questions 1 and 2 right now. So there are 3 means in which states, countries do their foreign policy. That is through diplomacy, international law, and international organizations. And we're going to cover the first 2 and just begin number 3 in this lecture. So first, diplomacy. This is states' skilled representatives engaging in discussion and negotiation. These are professional diplomats trained by the Foreign Service. They reside at embassies or consuls, and they discuss matters with other countries' diplomats or foreign consuls. These are not just average Joes from countries getting together and just talking. That is not diplomacy. Diplomacy are professionals, at least within the word professionals, in quotations, discussing different events within the countries. They're oftentimes face-to-face, but not always. A lot of them happens over phone calls, or even with our technology today through sort of face-to-face, but via technology such as Google Meet or even Skype. And then you have what's called bilateral or multilateral agreements. Bilateral, that basically means two countries agree on something. For example, the Treaty of Paris between the United States and Britain, ending the Revolutionary War. Bilateral. Multilateral, many countries agreeing, such as the Treaty of Versailles, ending World War I. Several countries signed that. The Department of State in the United States is responsible for its diplomacy. This shows you just the bureaucracy of it, starting with the Secretary of State, going all the way down to the individual section leaders and leaders of the different divisions. These are some of the different Secretary of States going up to 2016, the current presidential administration. So you have Madeleine Albright, who served under President Bill Clinton. You have Colin Powell, General Colin Powell, who served under President George W. Bush for his first term. Condoleezza Rice served as President George W. Bush's second term. Hillary Clinton served as President Obama's Secretary of State for his first term, and Senator John Kerry served as President Obama's second Secretary of State. Treaties, these are when this is a formal agreement, when 2 or more countries officially sign and agree on something. It is binding. They do sign their names on the dotted line, usually in areas of military or economics. Oftentimes these end wars, such as there have been a lot of Treaty of Parises out there. On the other hand, like NAFTA, which is a North American Free Trade Agreement, which has actually been replaced just this few months ago. You'll be reading an article about NAFTA as well as one about the replacement for NAFTA, the USMCA. The START Treaty was one that limited nuclear weapons between the Soviet Union at the time and the United States. And the European Union official treaty. It did have 27 nations, but just a few months ago, Britain made it official and separated from the European Union. International regimes are different. International regimes are agreements, but they're not binding. They're more of guidelines. So basically, countries are pretty much free to go along with them or not go along with them as they see fit. For example, the Kyoto Protocol was signed, so the Kyoto Protocol was done. I forget the exact year, but it was done several decades ago in Kyoto, Japan, and it was an agreement between countries to limit their carbon emissions for air pollution. Again, it is just an agreement. It is a norm. It is not a binding treaty. And the WTO, the World Trade Organization, a loose group of countries who set trade policies. They can have some influence when they all decide together to maybe embargo or cut off or restrict trade to a certain country or region, but countries can choose to go along with that or not at their will. Here are countries that are members of the WTO, observers as well as non-members as well. As you see, most of the world is a part of the WTO. Also some groups of countries. You have the G8, which are the 8 largest economies in the world. You have the G20, which are the 20 largest economies in the world, judging by GDP. The second mechanism of international relations is international law, a set of rules broadly accepted by most countries on conduct internationally. However, as we've discussed, a law that is unenforced is a nullified law, and it is pretty hard to enforce a lot of these laws. It's based on the idea of natural law, that there are universal principles of behavior that are recognizable through human reason. Again, there's that classical liberal view we've talked about at the beginning of the semester. And the two main ways of enforcing international law are the International Court of Justice, known as the ICJ, and the International Criminal Court. The main difference, the International Court of Justice, they mitigate disputes between countries. So they're basically like referees. They try to make sure countries get their disputes recognized peacefully. Whereas the International Criminal Court, they can actually punish countries or individual persons. For example, it was the International Criminal Court that tried, convicted, and imprisoned many of the instigators of the Rwanda genocide, as well as a famous person who was involved in the Serbian Kosovo conflict and Bosnian conflict. Slobodan Milosevic, the former president of Serbia, was captured and found guilty of crimes against humanity for ethnic cleansing and genocide in the Balkans in the 1990s. He has since died in prison. But again, the ICJ, they basically kind of act as referees. The ICC can actually have punitive effects on individuals or countries. And then finally, we're just going to nibble at international organizations. These are groups, both government and non-governmental, that do business or have dealings in different countries. Another name for these are transnational institutions. There are, the first type is called intergovernmental organizations, or IGOs. These basically, the members are countries, not people. You cannot join the United Nations, for example. You cannot join the EU as a person. Your country joins it. There are over 300 of them. Some of the more common ones you think of are the European Union, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. ASEAN is the Association of Southeastern Asian Nations, the Arab League, the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Health Organization, who's obviously been in the news a lot lately. And these are just some of the different symbols. You have the World Bank symbol. This is NATO here, and this is the UN. So again, IGOs are countries joined together, not people. And we will pick up with the other types of international organizations next class. I hope you guys are staying safe, staying healthy. If you need a laugh, I posted some funny videos from the office videos and movie videos on my Haiku site. Feel free to partake. I miss all of you and hope to see you soon.